Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, The Future is Here, Deliver a Better Digital Workspace Experience Through Intelligence and Automation. My name is Katie Fuqua, and I will be your host for today's presentation. Our featured speakers today are Calvin Hsu, VP of Product Marketing at Citrix, and Andrew Hewitt, Analyst serving infrastructure and operations professionals at Forrester. Before we get started, I'd like to cover a couple of housekeeping details. We will have a dedicated question and answer session at the end of today's presentation, and I invite you to submit any of your questions at any time during today's presentation using the Ask a Question window in the webinar interface. Also, this event is being recorded, and a link to the on-demand version will be sent to everyone in a follow-up email. With that, I would like to now go ahead and hand it over to Calvin and Andrew to kick off the presentation. Welcome, and thank you guys again so much for joining us.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie. Hi, everyone. My name is Calvin. I've been with Citrix now for the past 15 years in a variety of different roles, but very happy today to be leading our product marketing team, talking about our combined workspace, networking, and analytics solutions. And today, obviously, we'll be focusing on the digital experience and workspaces and how we can improve the overall employee experience through some of our technology options. Andrew?
Awesome. Well, thanks, everybody, for having me today. My name is Andrew Hewitt. I'm an analyst at Forrester Research. If you're not familiar with us, we are a market research firm, based out of the United States. And my research really focuses on two things. One is sort of the nitty-gritty details around digital workspace technology. So I cover everything from devices to client virtualization to unified endpoint management to enterprise mobility, all of the sorts of technology-related factors that contribute to my second area of research, which is employee experience. So my research is really charged with helping IT leaders better enable employees with technology to drive engagement, to drive a better employee experience for their firm. So everything that I look at from a technology perspective is through the lens of how do we promote a better employee experience amongst our employees. So I'm so happy to be here today discussing some of the trends that we're seeing in digital workspaces today. And so maybe let's get started a little bit and just dive into some slides. I have a couple upfront slides around some of the things we're seeing around employee experience and how that relates to technology and digital workspaces in particular. And then we'll talk about some of the ways that things are evolving from the digital workspace market perspective. So first thing, if we were to identify a trend in today's digital workspace market, an overarching trend, it's really that digital workspaces are transitioning their focus away from being an access layer on an application catalog towards being a place where employees actually go to get their work done. And what I mean by that is that in the past, digital workspaces were basically seen as a way to strike a balance between the needs of employees and the needs of IT. Essentially, digital workspaces were a compromise. It enabled IT leaders to enable employees with access to technology while also having adequate management and security over that technology. Now, of course, striking that balance is still incredibly important. But what I would say is that the focus has shifted towards creating a space where employees can not only access various applications, but they can get their job done. They can get their work inside of the workspace itself. So employee productivity is now, what I'm hearing from my clients, is the central goal of what they're trying to do. Although management and security are important, it's really about enabling the productivity of the user, and there's good reason for that. That's because productivity is so inextricably linked to providing a good experience to employees at work. When employees have a good experience, they're much more likely to be engaged, which means they're more productive, they provide more discretionary effort, they stay for long, fruitful careers, which means lower retention overall. But here's, the thing about that is, most people don't really understand, what makes up a good experience for employees. If you were to ask a group of managers, what makes employees happy? They're most likely to say things like benefits, work-life balance, good coworkers, pay, things like that. And while those things are important, they're not the most important. The most important thing that we found from our research and also from other academic research as well is productivity. The ability to make progress each and every day towards something that you believe is important is one of the number one, or is the number one driver of employee experience today. So the conventional wisdom about what makes people happy is actually wrong. It's that ability to get stuff done each and every day. That's the thing that matters the most, making that progress. And that's why 96% of employees in the top quartile of employee experience, according to another study, report high levels of work performance. Just 73% in the bottom quartile of employee experience report high performance. So the question remains, how do you enable employees to be successful every single day? The good news for IT leaders is that technology plays such a giant role in enabling employees to get their work done every day, which means the decisions that IT makes, the tools that IT selects, have much more business relevance now than they did, say, 10 or 20 years ago. And IT is actually really at the forefront of driving a better employee experience because they're the closest to the productivity challenges that employees face on a daily basis. We've actually verified this recently in our research too. We recently released this report called the Employee Experience Index. And what we did was we used our workforce benchmark survey, which analyzes the responses of, I think, 8,000 or 9,000 different global information workers. And we were trying to figure out what really engages an employee. What are the things that actually drive that employee experience? We analyzed over 90 different factors contributing to overall employee experience. It's statements like, I feel empowered to get my work done, my manager supports me to be successful, my coworkers are a big reason why I stay at my organization, and we looked at the responses and how people were engaging with those questions. What we found was that only 18 statements were the most influential for driving the employee experience, and 30% of those 18 statements were technology related. So 30% of the top 18 are driven by technology related statements. That's pretty astounding if you think about this fundamental transition where everybody is thinking employee experience is all about benefits and pay and recognition and all of that. Actually what we found was that 30% of it is all technology related. It's all productivity related. So the statements that you see on the screen here, I believe that my IT department helps make me productive. I have sufficient training on the technology I use. Technology helps me work on what's important to me, and so on and so forth. Those 6 statements actually have such a big impact on that overall employee experience. And the fact that productivity is so central to employee experience and that technology plays such a large role in driving a better employee experience, those are 2 big reasons why we're seeing digital workspaces evolve from just a collection of apps to places where employees get work done. That transition has to happen. It needs to be focused on the productivity of the user overall and not just on the management and security features that have been so prevalent in the past. So in transitioning a little bit, to actually help enable get that work done, to help people be their most productive, we're also seeing digital workspaces evolve to become a lot more human-centric. And what do I actually mean by human-centric? As you can see here, the technology that surrounds employees it's comprised of many different elements, right? There's apps, there's devices, there's virtualization of all types, there's networking, there's things like virtual assistants, chatbots, new things that are coming into the working environment. And at the end of the day, it's complex, right? It's confusing. It's not so easy to get work done in such a fractured environment. And why is that? Because it places so much of a cognitive load on employees. And it's frankly pretty exhausting to work in this kind of fractured environment. So when I talk about human-centric digital workspaces, I'm trying to draw the line between the delivery of the workspace and aligning it with the actual cognitive science of how the human brain works and designing the digital workspace so that it aligns with the psychology of productivity. So I think what we're seeing from a general trends perspective is, one, the digital workspace is evolving to become much more productivity focused, but it's also evolving to become much more in line with the things that enable people to be productive from a psychology, from a cognitive science perspective. It's evolving to help people meet the various demands that they have at work. And some of those demands, we're going to get into here, and we're going to talk a little bit about what are those different elements of the digital workspace that are evolving to help people meet those demands as they go to work here. So let's transition a little bit here. I want to talk about some of these key demands. Things like context switching. We know that's disastrous to productivity overall. Mundane work, complex legacy technology, inflexible IT policies, escalating distractions. These are all demands that people are facing on a daily basis. And what we're seeing now is that the digital workspace is evolving to actually help people meet these demands by providing more resources to help people overcome the various challenges that they have. So let's talk about each one of these demands that we see here, and we can discuss how the digital workspace is evolving to meet those demands. And as we go through this, I'll invite Calvin to join the conversation as we go through this too, so that we can have a nice conversation back and forth around how we're both seeing digital workspaces evolve to meet some of these demands here. So the first thing is really around context switching. We know from the work of Sophie Leroy, if you're not familiar with her, she's a professor at the University of Washington. And she's written a ton of research about context switching and how harmful that is to productivity. And the reason why context switching is so harmful to productivity is due to this concept called attention residue, which essentially means that when a human switches from one task to the next, their attention doesn't immediately follow. In fact, while they have moved on to task B, their brain might still be processing information from task A. So even if they don't realize that this is happening, it is actually psychologically happening. So essentially, context switching leaves you thinking about two things at once. So not a really great recipe for productivity. When this comes to the digital workspace, I think what we've initially seen was solving of the context switching through consolidation of work resources, in particular applications. It used to be that you would have to go from your native client application to your web browser to a separate space for your virtual applications, and that was all very much separate, right? It had a big cognitive load on the employee overall. What we've now seen is that all of this is combined, right? And this has been a big feature of digital workspaces for quite some time now, is your ability to go in, log in, have access to SaaS applications, virtual applications, web-based applications, mobile applications if you're on a mobile device, etc. So you're eliminating that context switching back and forth between the applications immediately within the digital workspace. More recently, however, I think what we've seen is that the digital workspaces are evolving to surface information from those apps directly in a central feed within the digital workspace, so that employees don't even have to go to different applications in the first place. So imagine you want to get the most recent company information about a new benefit rollout or something like that, but you don't want to log on to the content repository where it's stored or the HR app where it's stored. You're actually just getting that information available right in front of you. So I think the big change that we've seen from a context switching perspective is that it's not just the consolidation of the apps themselves residing, but the surfacing of the information within those apps to reduce the context switching overall. Is that something that you've been seeing as well, Calvin?
Yeah, absolutely. I would just add that that is what you're describing, Andrew, is really the state of the technology and how the solution offers are evolving. When I talk to customers, that by and large they're still just trying to get the consolidation part right and get the unification there. And I don't want anyone to be discouraged by thinking, oh well, it's moving so fast, how do I keep up? That first step of just being able to get the applications kind of aggregated and unified into at least one access context is an important part of the journey, and these things do build on each other, right? So once you start building and aggregating the resources, then we have the opportunity to do what you're talking about and actually extracting critical actions out of them. And it is a journey. There is a pathway, and when you choose a solution partner to take you down that path, that should be part of the discussion that you have.
Absolutely, I totally agree, and you're right that you definitely shouldn't underestimate the amount of work that's necessary to get those applications running in a consolidated kind of way. But we have seen a lot of great examples of companies that have adopted more of that unified framework too, with a lot of great success out there. So I think it is kind of step one is definitely getting that consolidation of the work resources happening, and then secondarily, how do I extract that information? Absolutely, totally agree there. In the second area, around mundane work, we know from a lot of studies out there, but one in particular showed that employees only spend 44% of their time working on tasks that are core to their job. In other words, 44% of the time spent on what they were actually hired for in the first place, which is pretty ridiculous if you think about it. That's a huge waste of money if you're going to hire someone and they spend almost 60% of their time doing things that are not really critical to what they were hired for. What we're seeing with digital workspaces now is that the emergence of virtual assistants is helping to automate some of that mundane work. So when we talk about automation, we talk about intelligence, and as that's applied to the digital workspace overall, you can think about things like what are those tasks that are really just kind of frustrating from an employee perspective, and how can I automate that, or how can I use intelligence to help automate that? A good example is things like expense reports, the thing that nobody wants to do, right? Over time, the digital workspace can actually look at what people are approving and what they don't, and learn and automate that action over time. So, for instance, if I'm consistently getting information within my digital workspace that says, so-and-so wants you to approve this expense report for $20, and I consistently am going in there and approving that expense report. Over time, I think what we're looking the digital workspace to do is to recognize that behavior that I have, that I'm always going to be approving expense reports lower than $20. I don't really care that much. And so what virtual assistants can help do is automate that entire process so that I don't ever even have to go in and approve that expense report on my own. It's just learning over time, and it can take care of a lot of that mundane work. I think another area of interest, for a lot of people, and this certainly strikes home with me personally, but I know it probably resonates with a lot of you as well, is meetings and setting up meetings. And nobody really wants to take the time to set up all of the conferencing resources and things like that associated with getting a meeting started. One of the interesting things that I think digital workspaces has the potential to help a lot of IT organizations out and a lot of employees out with is, how do we set up a meeting when we can sense that there's a lot of urgency for people to be in person and talking about that? For instance, if there's a lot of chatter in Slack or in email about some urgent customer problem, and there's a lot of people responding to that, can the digital workspace come in and say, oh, we recognize there are a lot of people talking about this, let's set up a meeting when everybody's free, because we have access to the whole calendar, because we have access to everybody that's on that email chain or within that Slack channel. So I think down the road, that's certainly a capability that's available today, but as people start moving in this direction towards a more intelligent workspace, that's going to be one of the things that's going to be realistic for a lot of organizations out there, is really automating a lot of that mundane work that, frankly, nobody really wants to do.
Yeah, I would say also just to watch out for how quickly this can take root and employees, or really it's really about people just wanting this kind of assistance, right? Think about things like, I can't remember the last time I opened my clock application on my phone to set an alarm, right? You just speak to your voice assistant, you get some kind of virtual assistant, or checking the weather. These were things that were like, am I really going to talk to my phone and ask it for these kinds of things just a few years ago? And then very quickly, they become part of a routine. You start to expect them. I think those are the types of adoption rates that you may find for some of these very common tasks, and sort of the more frustrating they are, or more mundane they are, the more quickly people are going to be interested in adopting them.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And I think with some of them, it'll be probably a pretty big change management effort in terms of getting people to not rely on some of the mundane work that they're used to. I think it can be intriguing to get into the mundane work because it is easy. I think it'll be interesting to see, how do organizations manage that change from, if people are spending 60% of their time doing mundane work, how do they enable them to really focus on that work that's important and relevant to their job going forward? So I think we're right at the cusp of that actually starting to occur. So I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out over time. But let's move on and talk about complex legacy technology. So this is a huge thing when I talk to Forrester customers, right? They almost always have hundreds of legacy enterprise applications running on the back end. It could be 150 applications. It could be 1,500. I recently talked with a customer that 1,500 various applications they were running on the back end, trying to modernize all of that. It could be things like the ERP system, could be CRM, all sorts of other legacy applications that were implemented years ago, maybe decades ago. Normally, they don't have this great user interface, right, that modern applications today have. So they're difficult to use, they're time-consuming to use, and they're totally frustrating to use from the employee experience perspective, and related to the mundane work that we just talked about. If I'm spending an entire Friday afternoon trying to navigate the ancient expense report system at my company, I'm not going to make progress towards my most important work, and that will have a ripple down effect on my experience over time, especially if there are multiple types of systems where I'm spending a lot of time actually trying to manage those and and get done that kind of mundane work. What we're seeing right now, and this is I think a reality, I think a lot of customers can start taking advantage of this right now, is solving this issue of complex legacy tech by surfacing relevant tasks and information from those back-end systems so that employees don't ever have to log into those systems again, unless they need to fulfill a very complex task, which most employees, if you're outside of finance or HR, you really don't need to know the complex intricacies of using the CRM platform or the ERP platform, right? You're using it for 4 or 5 different things. And so what we're seeing is the emergence of what's known as micro apps. They're basically bite-sized workflows that allow employees to see and take action on relevant information within the workspace feed. So imagine I log into my workspace and all of a sudden I have basically what looks like almost like an Instagram, Facebook type of card feed where that is all being fed to me from those back-end systems. It might be there's an expense report that needs to be approved. There might be a PTO request that needs to be approved, or it could be something that I want to actually input into the system. Say I want to check my PTO balance. I want to go on vacation, something like that. And being able to take action directly within the workspace as opposed to having to jump into those applications that will be running somewhere else and like we mentioned are very difficult to navigate overall. So the emergence of micro apps, I think, is a really interesting development in the digital workspace, technology space right now. Because it has so much potential to automate a lot of that mundane work and make that experience of interacting with the legacy technology that a lot of companies have much easier and much more seamless. So I sense a lot of urgency and also interest in adopting that type of micro app environment to help improve the employee experience within the actual workspace overall. And I know that Citrix is deep in this space as well. Calvin, did you want to comment on some of the areas that Citrix is seeing with this?
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely one of the more captivating topics that we get involved in with customers as they think about how they can impact the overall workday and kind of realizing that these micro apps and the simplified workflows, how much time it can save, how much frustration, probably more importantly, it can save, back to that whole connection between productivity and experience and engagement. I think the other thing that we see very quickly is, while there are mundane tasks that we want to overcome or simplify, what quickly becomes apparent to customers as well is that once they start breaking down these larger legacy applications into these micro apps and these sort of granular elements of your work, that we're actually able to start tying some of those micro apps together. So where these legacy apps were maybe not built to interact with other applications, or they were not aware of sort of workflows between the HR application, the email, the calendaring, and then back out to some kind of new collaboration software. That could be the role that a micro app or a series of micro apps takes in that productivity experience, and being able to leverage the interaction between applications and workflows across applications in new ways or in ways that people have been doing, but just in a lot more complex and time-consuming processes.
Totally. I think it would be really interesting to, obviously the mundane work is an important aspect. We want to get rid of a lot of that noise from the employee technology experience, but how do micro apps evolve over time so that they're not just helping me with my mundane work and reducing the noise, but they're directly helping me with my most important work too. I think that's to your point, sort of the phase 2 around this is helping people to really be successful through the simplification of the workflows overall. So I think that's a great point and something that we definitely see a lot of interest from our clients at Forrester is enabling people in that type of way. The other, fourth demand that we see from an employee technology experience perspective is really around inflexible IT policies, right? And this has just been something that has been top of mind for so many employees for so long. We know from our surveys that 40% of global information workers will circumnavigate an IT policy if it stands in the way of them being productive. And normally that's going to happen when a person is trying to gain access to some resource or is trying to copy and paste some information from one application to another. They're just trying to be productive. And so circumnavigating that policy in order to maintain that productivity is something that they feel justified in doing. And while IT certainly can't have a Wild West approach to this and let employees do whatever they want, they can be more conditional in a way that they enable people to access applications. So what we're seeing from the digital workspace perspective is much more of a focus on contextual access, on being able to determine what's the context of that user as they're trying to accomplish work, and using that context to make access decisions that enable people to get access to those things that help make them productive, but also have some type of way to protect the IT environment from potentially malicious devices or applications. So this idea of contextual access is really about using a variety of different variables. It could be things like device posture, app posture, location, network health, etc., to make decisions regarding access to digital workspace resources. And the idea is really to help improve the authentication experience for employees and reduce the risk of getting kicked out of a system for no reason, a false positive, if you will. So it's really trying to improve that overall security standing while also improving the overall employee experience. And I think one of the more interesting things that has developed is, I think in the past, contextual access was still very much, block and tackle. If there was a variable that wasn't hit, it would, it could kick the employee out of the system or something. What we're seeing now is, even if one of those variables isn't hit, there are still options for people to access resources. So let's say, your device is not managed. It's not enrolled in your MDM software, or it doesn't have your agent from your PC management vendor or something like that. And normally, without that type of control, you wouldn't be able to have access because it's an untrusted device. Nobody really knows what's running on that device. But what we're seeing now is provide an option for those unmanaged device use cases by doing something like launching a secure browser on that device that would give you access to those applications or those documents or resources. It would have a little bit more security in the sense that you wouldn't be able to pull information out of that browser, but at least it would give you that some access and not completely kick you out of the system. So what we're seeing, I think, from Digital Workspaces is a little bit more empathy of what that employee is trying to do and trying to match that access policy to that correct piece of context that we're looking at from the IT management perspective there. Calvin?
Yeah, I'd say our ability now to understand context is so much more powerful than it has been in the past, right? And when you talk about policies and the application of those, it's getting to the point also where I'd say it's almost moving beyond the idea of policies or sort of beyond the idea of simple if-then statements. right? So where at least that's the way Citrix is looking at it, and where in the past we might have said, okay, it's a device policy, if this, then that. Now we're kind of looking at it even more like, what is the behavior of that person on that device, and is that typical for them? And are they supposed to be doing that? Is that consistent with their job role or what their peers are doing in a similar group? And then be able to draw context and conditions out of that through analytics and through really AI and machine learning to understand what the situation, the scenario is even better. And I think that's sort of where we can get around or modify the way we think about those policies or the inflexibility that we experienced in the past.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The interest in kind of behavior analytics is definitely something we hear from Forrester clients quite a bit. And finally, before I hand it over to Calvin here, is really around escalating distractions. This is a newer topic, but today, knowledge workers succumb to distraction every 10 minutes, according to some research. And once they're distracted, it actually takes them 23 minutes to regain their focus. So at best, distraction is inhibiting, access to an enhanced state of flow, of an ability to focus for a long period of time, which, has ramifications for your company in terms of building new products or building new customer acquisition strategies or, just investing in innovation for your company. You need to have these people that can think critically for a long period of time. So the idea of distraction and the impact that is happening from both our personal use of technology, but also our work use of technology, I think is an emerging trend that we're starting to see. The digital workspace, I do believe is starting to help deal with some of these distractions. One is through the consolidation of the work resources and limiting the context switching as well. I think some of the other elements are around things like being able to block off time in the calendar if there are too many meetings going on in someone's calendar, being able to proactively book time for focus. That's something that we've seen as a use case for a lot of the workspace and sort of workforce analytics types of solutions that are out there today. I think that there's also an element around restricting usage of pop-ups or notifications within the digital workspace, to allow people to maintain their focus for a long period of time without actually having to have those notifications popping into their field of view every time they're trying to work on something. So I think this is a newer area, but we are starting to see much more interest from the broader vendor community as well as from our Forrester clients around instituting and implementing a better balance between the connectivity that we have from the technology perspective and the need for people to really focus on that work that, like we mentioned earlier, they were hired for. So I think this is a really interesting trend that we're seeing. It'll be interesting to see how this develops over time, but it's definitely something that we're starting to see, more and more. It's been 10 years, a little bit more, since the release of the first smartphone, and I think we're starting to actually see some of the ramifications of the way the technology plays in our lives today. So I expect digital workspaces will also evolve to solve some of that need as we go forward.
Yeah, people are never more distracted than when they're on their phone, right? And the phone being next to you or in your pocket or near you all the time, then it kind of creeps into the rest of your life. And I love that idea about restricting the notifications and pop-ups, or put another way, having the workspace be able to prioritize those pop-ups and say, hey, something is critical now, but this other thing maybe is not critical for another week or another part of the day. You can wait until the end of the day when you get these things done, and just having someone help you do that, or something help you do that. Can become invaluable to people as they think about productivity, especially when they're mobile.
Absolutely. So I think we talked a lot about the different trends in general, digital workspace, but I think we want to transition now and talk specifically about Citrix Workspace. So I'll hand the next slide over to you, Calvin, to get started here, and then I'll be here for question and answer at the end as well.
Terrific. Thanks, Andrew. I think that's a fabulous tee up for really all the inspiration that's gone into the Citrix workspace and how we're trying to really develop and implement, in partnership with our customers, a more intelligent way to work. And I think one of the key words here, that keeps coming up over and over again, the idea that we're trying to help people get work done. We're trying to help them be productive, and it's a different mindset, I would say. So, typically folks that kind of come into these sorts of webinars, they're thinking very IT focused. I'd invite everyone to think more about what is the end result, what is the outcome that you're trying to drive, and how can we address some of these productivity, experience, engagement challenges that Andrew teed up for us through use of technology, and less about, okay, what are the bits and bytes of how the infrastructure comes together, reference architectures and things like that. Of course, we have those capabilities, and we're providing those to help you with those, but it is a bit of a broader journey, thinking about how work gets done and how technology can influence that. So, to kind of recap a lot of the things that we just talked about, right? So what are some of the things that really originate from technology and drive frustration or challenges for the end user or for the employee? So certainly having too many applications is one of them, right? And all those applications are kind of designed in their own silos, and they're not necessarily thinking about how they interact with the rest of the employee experience throughout that day. Andrew mentioned, having legacy applications that are in the environment. A lot of times, our answer for legacy applications is to introduce a new modern application, which tomorrow becomes the legacy application all over again. We just keep adding and adding and adding applications and technologies on top of each other without actually streamlining any of the processes or thinking about what activity is trying to get done across those apps. So that leads to the complexity and the idea that going in between all these applications increases our time spent doing mundane tasks and things that are not actually part of the job that we're hired for, or just setting people down on a path where they're spending as much as 20% of their day just looking for the right application, looking for the right feature inside an application, or looking for data that was created with an application and I can't remember where I put it, right? So a lot of complexity that arises from this. And then sort of related to that, there's mundane tasks become part of the busy work, but then there's a lot of things that we need our employees to do as part of their the conditions of their employment, but it is effectively busy work. It's not really part of what they were brought on board to do, right? So if you're a whiz business data analyst, your job is not to take care of your HR record, for example, right? But it is your responsibility to get that stuff done, but you want to get it done as efficiently and as quickly and as accurately as possible so they can get back to what you were trained and hired to do. So part of this journey then, as we think about it at Citrix, is really how can we start to address these different elements of the challenges. And the framework that we think of is, well, first, get some organization around all those applications. That would be sort of, like step one of cleaning up your room is to just make sure that we understand, where everything is and that it all has a place and that it's nicely organized inside of one access context. And that can't be underestimated, the value or the challenge of getting that done, because we do have so many different types of applications now, SaaS, web, mobile, virtualized applications and local applications. And so having a solution that can really incorporate all those things is no small task, and one that very few players in the industry even have the ability to do that. And then once you have them in a unified access scenario, then you really kind of earn the right then to start guiding or extracting out what are the activities that happen from those applications. And it can maybe intercepting some of the notifications that every one of those applications is generating, and then organizing those notifications and kind of guiding someone through the way that they work. which notifications are more important than others, bring those to the top, helping understand what activities need to get done. I think this also, plays into sort of our multi-generational type of workforce that we have today as well, where you may have folks entering the workforce that understand the technology and how to navigate it very well, but they don't understand the business process. Well, if we can start to guide the work through the applications that they need to use, we can help train them in the business process aspect of it. Conversely, on the other end of it, you may have folks that are very, very senior and understand the business process, but they're not as familiar with the technology. This element of guiding, we can help guide them through the technology part of it, right? They understand what business processes they need to get done, but add some of this context and prioritization and machine learning that helps guide them through it. And then finally, in the third phase would be once we start seeing the guiding happening and the business process starting to execute within the workspace, now we have data that we can start to learn how to automate some of those things. Are they particularly mundane tasks, as we were talking about, or do we notice that one application or one workflow tends to be followed by another one, and starts to draw linkages in between the different applications and the different actions that happen in them, and then start to automate them. And those become sort of learned behaviors of the workspace. Where the workspace actually starts to help you get work done versus just presenting you with the work that you need to do. And then the outcomes of that, right, are certainly, the improved productivity helps with improved engagement and the overall employee experience. And that employee then has what we think of as a higher employee lifetime value, meaning from the day they join, they're onboarded faster by this workspace. The work they need to get done is presented to them, so they're productive quicker, right? Maybe their onboarding and training period is shortened, and they're able to carry that through for the rest of their career at your company, and in fact start to maybe even develop faster and progress faster because they have been more productive and more engaged along the way. So, how do we get this done, and what sorts of barriers does today's technology really put in front of us to get this done, to get this kind of experience, and what is our goal here, right? We think of this phrase as designing green button experiences, and really all that means is you think about that multifunction office contraption that many of us have in our buildings, right? There's tons of buttons, tons of features. Really, very few people know how to use all those features, right? It's not everyone's job to understand what every single one of those buttons does. That's really designed for the 1% of power users. And everybody else just wants to hit that green button that says go, copy, fax, whatever it is, right? And sort of distilling this entire complex piece of machinery into the real action, the real intent for the majority of what people are using it for. That's kind of one of the approaches that we can take to designing an intelligent and automated workspace, and that helps cut through a lot of that noise and that mud and distraction that we were talking about earlier. So designing that green button experience is really at the core of what the new Citrix Workspace experience is like. So let's take a look at what this is evolving into and what that intelligent experience means inside the Citrix Workspace. All right, so for many of you, this will be your first look at the future of what the workspace is. Those of you that are familiar with current experiences of whether it's our Citrix receiver or the current workspace app, you'll notice there's some marked differences between that and where things are headed in the future as we start to add some of this intelligence and automation. I'll draw your attention to a few different areas. The first one is really where you see the bulk of the real estate of that screen is now overtaken by this feed. And Andrew described it earlier as sort of a very much a social media kind of feed structure. And that's exactly what it's inspired by. It's inspired by that easy to learn consumer experience. Nobody needs a user manual to understand how to use something like Twitter, right? There's no manual for that. You just realize that, all the things that are important to me are showing up here, and over time you start to realize that, hey, things are actually getting prioritized for me as well, and that's the same idea here. So you have the feed consists of a list of either notifications or activities that you need to take. In many cases, you'll see here that there are actual action buttons that are included in there. So like in the middle of the screen there, you see the approve or send back for an expense report. And that is absolutely one of those mundane tasks that we were talking about where you want to be able to quickly get a view of all your expense reports across your team if you're a manager, and be able to plow through those in the first 10 minutes of your day, right? Rather than having to open up applications repeatedly throughout the day and sort of navigate to the approval part of it. What's interesting also is that there are things like micro apps that can pop out and give us more information about that expense report if we need it. Along the right-hand side up there in the right-hand corner, you see recommended actions. Right? So these are also micro apps of commonly performed actions that then can get pushed to the end user. And then these get sorted by what's most recently used or most commonly used by people in their role. And that may be everything from creating a service request to requesting PTO. It could be a variety of different activities, but all those done directly from within the workspace without having to exit out into the native application. So those notifications I mentioned, they come in different forms. In this case, it is a notification of someone getting a new role or position, or maybe it's a promotion. And what's great about this is that it can show up in the feed. Everybody in the team gets to see it, and then it can be dismissed very easily. A picture can accompany that as well. Just sort of quick, relevant bits of information, and then you can get on with your day, right? So you're not having to flip between multiple applications or being distracted in your email list of those types of things. Or worse, when people reply all to one of these notifications in your email, then that's multiple dings throughout the day that you're getting from that one activity or that one notification. Again, the task of completing an expense report and being able to get that done from directly within the workspace very quickly. Also being able to collect information and get insights pushed to me. Right? So this is, again, kind of pulling inspiration from the consumer world where instead of me going out to multiple sites to collect information and insights about things that I need, it's actually getting pushed to me and aggregated to me in one interface, in one context. So I'm not having to jump through applications and switch to different interfaces and kind of reorient myself. Now, of course, not everything is going to be a notification. Not everything is going to be a micro app. And for people's roles, they will absolutely need to launch full desktops and perhaps, full applications and perhaps desktops as well. So those are still available there on the right-hand side. No worry about that. The key here being, though, that common activities that you don't need the full application for can go into the feed, but then more complex things where you do need the application, okay, I'm ready to go into that application, dedicate some time to working through a process in there, that becomes an option. So it's not, the workspace is not application launcher driven or focused as much as it is work focused anymore. Same with files. Recent documents that I've used can be surfaced there. There's also intelligence that will go behind this, and not just the recency of when I use an application or a file, but also, is that file recommended for me? And that recommendation might come from ratings that my coworkers give a document, or it might come from how frequently the document is being viewed by my colleagues. And then as I look through my files or I'm searching for something, that recommendation engine kind of kicks into play, much like we think about maybe streaming media service. Based on knowing what my viewing behaviors are, it knows what shows to recommend to me. And the same can happen here in a work context. And then, as mentioned, the whole idea of the searching and being able to be more productive. One of those stats that Andrew threw out was like the context switching can cost us up more than 20% of our time. Well, part of that time sink is really driven into the search, right? And just looking for the application, looking for the function within the application, looking for a piece of data within many multiple applications that I have. So anything that is part of the workspace, whether it's an application or a document, can be part of this universal search capability that we're building in there as well. And so we're reducing the frustration it takes to find relevant information that the worker needs. And lastly, the virtual assistants. All right, so we brought this up earlier as well, but the beauty of the workspace is that as it gets used more and as you put more applications into it, as you start building more micro applications and more notifications coming from all those things are being built into it, all of that is feeding into the intelligence of the workspace. It's part of the analytics for productivity that is the real engine behind this, and those tasks can become easier, and the way that the workspace responds to the end user just becomes more and more tuned to their personal work style and their personal productivity behaviors. And that's one of the real key things about the workspace is that it is designed for the person sitting in front of that screen, and it is designed there for personal productivity. Right? It really tries to learn who you are and what your behaviors are. This interface and this sort of design here, while it may modify a little bit for different screen sizes and form factors, effectively it will be the same across the multitude of devices that people use today to get work done. So desktops, tablets, mobile phones, there'll be a similar construct across all of those so that it is familiar, it is intuitive, and everything that you need to get work done is presented to you in a consistent way. Now, on the topic of those micro apps, right? So Citrix is building out of the box a number of micro apps for common applications that we know get used from some of the more popular services and SaaS services in particular that have those modern API access. We certainly recognize that there's going to be a host of legacy applications as well as other SaaS services that are maybe more industry or vertical specific, as well as there's going to be a wealth of new applications that people discover and launch and find useful. So that's why we also make available this micro app builder. So you can add new integrations in and new connections. You can assign those micro apps to different users and different groups. And then, of course, customize what those micro apps and what those sort of slide-out cards are and what kind of information they contain so that they're most effective for the business purpose. Right? So to kind of wrap this up before we go into Q&A, the whole idea of this modern, intelligent, automated workspace is it's to really pull together and aggregate all those different applications that get used. A big part of the employee experience is driven by the technology that they use, and really break down those applications into sort of these atomic units of work. Right? We're taking actions out of the applications because it's the action that gets work done, right? Not the application itself. So we're extracting the actions, presenting those in a simple, intuitive way inside the workspace, so you can actually be productive and accomplish tasks in here, whether you're on a full desktop screen or on a mobile device. And then I do want to point out also that, as I was mentioning, that the workspace, as we're envisioning it, is designed for personal productivity. Certainly there are times when, or there's going to be many times when you need to take that personal productivity and information and insights that you glean about your job and share that with somebody else or interact with somebody else on an approval workflow or a collaborative effort. Right? And that's why we're building in many integrations to those team collab types of solutions, certainly like SharePoint, like Microsoft Teams, email integrations, things like Slack, all those types of those other things that are really designed for improving team productivity and team collaboration. We very nicely dovetail into that by focusing on the specific end user and then enabling them to take information or insights or create actions out of their workspace into and bring those into team collaboration applications. Okay, so you can see now, just to put a bow on that, how a lot of the trends and the challenges and the directional things that Andrew was talking about that he's seeing through his research are very directly influencing the way that Citrix is thinking about the workspace, about how we're evolving this. And as I mentioned before, right, I know, many of you are probably quite far away from this type of experience, but in every customer conversation I've had, it's immediately clear how it can benefit the organization, how it can put IT in a position of really contributing to the productivity of employees as well as their engagement and experience, and how much energy and excitement those employees want to bring into their job every day. There's a definite path that we've laid out from where most customers are today and just trying to get some control and manage the chaos of their applications, organize that into a basic workspace, and then start to extract these actions and productivity and intelligence and automation features that we're building in, and evolve that into what we think of as the newer, modern type of workspace. So with that, I'll invite Andrew back and turn it over to Katie to address any questions that may have come from the audience.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Calvin. So as we do move into this Q&A, I would just like to remind the audience that if you have a question, please submit it into the Ask a Question area on your screen. Simply type the question into the text box and hit Submit. So it looks like we've got a couple lined up here. So we'll start out with the first one. Are existing Citrix Workspace customers entitled to new intelligence features?
Yeah, so I can take that. Obviously, so for our workspaces, we think of these as the evolution of the workspace capabilities. And yeah, while there are multiple additions or ways you can acquire different workspace capabilities, we are thinking of the intelligence as a core capability of a workspace. And so, if you're making that decision today and you're looking at Workspace Premium and Premium Plus, yeah, we are absolutely planning that Intelligent Workspace will be part of that.
Great. The second one we have is, how are most companies measuring business outcomes related to workspaces?
I can take a stab at that one first, and maybe Cal, if you have anything to add, you can do that as well. But the way that I see it, most frequently is there's intangible, sort of benefits or business outcomes, and there's also tangible business outcomes. And I think most companies focus on the tangible business outcomes first because they're easier to quantify. It could be things like the consolidation of their management platforms in terms of a licensing cost, or reduction of security threats, or reduction in help desk tickets. Due to that better end user experience. What I think is the more effective strategy, though, and we're starting to see more companies do this, is quantify the intangible benefits of things like enhanced productivity or enhanced user satisfaction, lower frustration. Some companies have been doing things like employee net promoter score, and actually looking at what that score is like before and after an implementation of a technology. Others are directly collecting that qualitative employee feedback. Some are even pairing that with quantitative feedback from the actual devices and the applications, and actually trying to track that end user experience. over time, and using that as kind of the basis for determining the overall business outcome. And I think that that's going to be something that becomes more and more important as people go forward with these workspace initiatives. Is you really want to look at trying to quantify the productivity benefits, and I think that some of the micro apps examples are a great example of actually just cutting the amount of time that people spend doing certain things. I don't know, Calvin, if there's anything that Citrix customers that you see frequently amongst your base as well.
Yeah, no, the NPS one is Net Promoter Score is an interesting one. I know of some customers that have talked to us about, well, couldn't one of those micro apps actually just be an NPS score collector, right? So right in the workspace, I can shoot up a quick poll or a sort of a pulse survey on NPS and get a quick gauge from employees in real time on how they're feeling about their work and their engagement. The other thing that we look at is, we've done a number of time trials ourselves, and I think going forward, it'd be interesting to look at the analytics and the data on comparing sort of the old way of doing things versus the newer workspace or micro app driven way. In some of our demos and engagements with customers, we've gone so far as to kind of look at what does it take to actually do something mundane like an expense report, right? And how many minutes does it take to accomplish that? And right when in the workspace, when you say maybe in the expense report example, click approve, and you hit that button, and before it disappears, showing the end user how much time they just saved, right? Like you just saved 4 minutes because you were doing this in the workspace versus having to go out and do it somewhere else. And so maybe some like real-time feedback like that would be interesting for the end user, and just to kind of show them, how the technology is helping them and helping them be more productive and helping them stay engaged in their work.
Alrighty, the next question that we got is, how should companies get started with workplace initiatives?
I think it really starts with understanding the employee, first of all, and understanding, what are those demands that they have, what challenges, what barriers do they accomplish, and trying to tailor that digital workspace experience to help meet those demands. And we definitely see clients out there doing things like surveying, doing things like employee journey mapping sessions to really identify, what are those main, challenges. So I think, there's a significant people portion of this that organizations need to address, first and foremost before they go down, well, really any kind of technology investment, but especially with something like digital workspace, which is going to be so ingrained in the daily productivity of the users. And then from there, I think it's about kind of the implementation of the consolidation of the applications and making sure that everything is enabled with single sign-on and connects and integrates with the rest of your infrastructure as well. But I think the most important part is really understanding that user need up front.
Okay, great. It looks like we have time for maybe about 2 more here. What we've got here is Citrix Workspace a cloud-based solution?
Yeah, so the answer is yes, and sort of. So absolutely, a lot of the things that we're creating and building are based on cloud-based services, analytics and the AI ML engine that drives it are cloud-based. But certainly we've designed the entire architecture really to be able to interact with a number of on-prem or hybrid environments as well. So we recognize that the reality is that there are applications that are living and will continue to live in people's data centers, and maybe people virtualize applications in desktops. Some of those may be in a privately run data centers. Some of those may be in private or public clouds as we go forward. Certainly there's going to be SaaS applications that are coming from external. Web applications may be cloud hosted or internally hosted. And there's going to be applications that are on local devices, on mobile devices, and on PCs. So the design of the workspace is really intended to be as inclusive as possible. And certainly, the more modern and managed APIs they have, and that sort of thing, then the more we can extract from them and the more we can do with them. But overall, the solution, the architecture is designed to enable hybrid, even if many of the components run out of the cloud.
Okay, great. And it looks like we've got time for one more. When will the new intelligent features be available?
Yeah, so we're targeting later this year in 2019. And as mentioned before, and so the workspace products are sold on a subscription basis. It's certainly within the year, folks will be able to see them, start to take advantage of them, and start implementing them in the second half of this year.
Okay, great. So that does look like all the time we've got right now for questions. And that does bring us to the end of our presentation. So I would like to extend a huge thank you to our speakers, Calvin Hsu and Andrew Hewitt, for a very, very informative presentation, and also a huge thanks to our audience for joining us. As a quick reminder, you can always check out and register for any other upcoming webinars and events by going to citrix.com/events. We hope you have a great day, and thanks so much for listening.